All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, you, our listener, you've really piqued our curiosity with this collection of articles about how anthropologists look at dance. We're ready to unpack all of this. We want to pull out those key insights, give you that real grasp of the subject without it feeling overwhelming.
It's going to be a journey for sure.
Yeah, our listener, they're all about that quick but thorough knowledge, those light bulb moments. And well, let's face it, that's what we all love, right? We're kind of on a mission here.
A mission to deliver, absolutely.
Exploring the anthropological perspective on dance across cultures and through time. And the best part is we're using the research you've provided, which spans decades, so we're in for a treat.
That's right. And it's fascinating, actually, to see how anthropology, which studies humanity in all its facets, how it approaches something like dance, which is, seemingly universal, but then again, incredibly specific to each culture.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
We'll be diving deep into these sources, kind of sifting through them to give you a clear picture of how this field of study, often called dance ethnology, has developed and what its core concerns are. It's a rich field.
One thing that struck me right away was how, well, studying dance wasn't exactly a top priority for anthropologists initially. Like, did you know that in 1974, an international dance conference only had 10 folks invited? 10.
Really?
Yeah. And a bit earlier, 1972, Anya Peterson-Royce, she actually tried to drum up more interest in dance among anthropologists, but even a few years later, in 76, a major meeting only had 6 papers on the topic. Talk about a slow start.
That's interesting because dance is such an integral part of human expression and social life. It's kind of surprising that it took a while for it to gain traction within anthropology, right?
Sure.
Those early efforts, like Royce's review, they were really important in advocating for why dance is so valuable for anthropological inquiry. The small numbers at those early gatherings really highlight that initial phase of, trying to build momentum.
It's like dance was trying to catch anthropology's eye for a while there.
Kind of like a slow dance, maybe?
Yeah, a slow dance to get noticed. So, okay, let's say anthropologists do turn their attention to dance. Where do they even begin to define it? Like across so many different cultures, what even qualifies as dance?
Right. That's the fundamental question, isn't it? What we see emerge from the sources is this idea that for movement to be considered dance, it needs to have, let's say, a grammar. And it needs to be intended as dance by those doing it and also interpreted as dance by those watching it.
Wait, grammatical, you're saying dance has a language of its own?
Exactly. Think of it like this. The grammar of a movement style is much like the grammar of spoken language. It has a structure, right?
Right.
Those specific movements, the steps themselves. Then it has style, which is how those movements are performed with certain qualities and nuances. And then crucially, it has meaning. And that meaning is deeply rooted in the culture. So to really get advanced, to understand it, you need to learn those basic steps, how they can be varied, and the syntax, you could say, the rules for how those steps are combined into sequences and phrases.
So it's not just folks moving around to music then?
Oh, way more than that. To understand dance from an anthropological point of view, you have to really immerse yourself in the cultural context. You have to understand the beliefs, the philosophy of the society where that dance exists. You can't separate the physical movements from what they signify to the people involved.
That makes sense. It's like trying to understand, I don't know, a religious ritual without knowing the religion itself. You might see the actions, but you wouldn't grasp the deeper meaning.
Precisely.
The sources you sent mentioned some really influential people who pioneered this kind of study. Gertrude Kurath, her name keeps popping up.
Oh, Kurath. She was a game changer, especially here in America. Her approach, very empirical. She was all about meticulous observation and documenting dance events in detail. Like everything. Costumes, musical instruments, patterns on the ground, postures, gestures, every step.
She was thorough.
Incredibly. And what's interesting, she often drew comparisons to European folk dance traditions.
Oh, really?
Which shows this connection to European scholars, folks like Kurt Sachs, who were interested in classifying dances and tracing how they spread.
So she was essentially trying to build a system, like a way to categorize all these dances, to study them in a structured way.
Exactly. She wanted to go beyond just recording the steps, to understand a dance's place within its cultural setting, to find ways to compare it across different groups. It was groundbreaking work.
Now, there's another name that comes up a lot, Franz Boas. His approach seems totally different from Kurath's focus on documenting everything.
Right, Boas. He was a huge figure, often called the father of American anthropology. And what's fascinating is how Boas, coming from a strong scientific background, He really shifted the focus of American anthropology towards, well, towards appreciating the immense diversity of human cultures.
Okay.
He really challenged the notion that there were these universal forms of art or dance, like a universal language that everyone naturally gets. This was a big step towards cultural relativism in dance studies, the idea that you can't judge a dance from another culture based on your own standards. You have to try to understand it from their perspective.
So he was basically saying don't impose your own cultural biases on how you interpret a dance.
Exactly. And his own work on the dances of the Northwest Coast indigenous peoples, it was groundbreaking. And his students, his intellectual descendants, folks like Herskovits, Merriam, Kealianohomoku, Royce, they all emphasized this, seeing dance as deeply embedded in its specific social context.
So Boas laid the foundation for understanding dance on its own terms, right?
You got it. And the sources mention Merriam and something called the Boasian doctrine.
What's that all about?
So Merriam was a leading figure in ethnomusicology, which is the study of music in cultural context.
Okay.
He was a big supporter of this Boasian idea that music and dance, they're not just isolated art forms, they're deeply connected to the society they come from. His students, they carried on this legacy, really looking at how music and dance reflect and shape the culture around them.
So it's all interconnected.
Absolutely. We also see the influence of Malinowski, who really emphasized understanding things from the natives' point of view. He was all about getting inside the minds of the people you're studying. And then there's Kenneth Pike, with his distinction between emic and etic perspectives.
Emic, etic. Those sound kind of like insider versus outsider views.
Yeah. Think of the emic perspective as trying to understand something from the inside, like you're a member of that culture. With dance, an emic perspective would mean trying to grasp what the dance means to the people who are actually doing it and watching it.
Okay, so you're trying to get into their heads.
Exactly. And in the etic perspective, that's more like an outsider's analytical view.
Yeah.
Using your own framework, your own categories to interpret what's happening.
So kind of like a scientist observing an experiment.
Kind of, yeah. Pike's work pushed researchers to try and understand cultures on their own terms, using their own systems, not just imposing Western interpretations onto non-Western dances. It was a big shift.
Fascinating. And there's also this mention of competence and performance, which are actually terms from linguistics. What do those have to do with dance?
So the idea here is that there's this underlying competence, like the knowledge you have of a dance system, the movements, the steps, the rules for combining them.
Okay.
And then there's the actual performance, which is how that knowledge is expressed in a real-life situation. The performance can vary,
Sure.
It depends on the dancer, the occasion, all sorts of things. Think of it like knowing the grammar of a language, that's competence, versus actually speaking a sentence, that's performance.
Okay, I get it. So you can know the rules, but how you use them, how you express yourself, that can be different every time.
Right. You can have different interpretations, different styles within the basic structure. It's what makes dance so dynamic.
So when an anthropologist is looking at movement, it's not just about describing what they see. What makes it specifically anthropological?
That's a great question. What makes it anthropological is that they're not just interested in the movements themselves. They're looking for the system behind the movement, the patterns, the organization, the structure.
Okay.
They're asking, why are people moving this way? What does it mean to them and their community? And how does their culture judge this movement? Like what's considered good, appropriate, skillful. They're interested in the social meaning, you see.
So they're going deeper, trying to uncover those layers of meaning behind the physical actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the way they approach this, it can differ. Some anthropologists might focus more on the context, the cultural backdrop of a dance, the symbolic meaning. They might not go into a detailed analysis of the actual steps. But then others, they think it's crucial to combine that cultural understanding with a really close examination of the movements themselves.
So some zoom out, others zoom in, but it's all about understanding the connection.
Precisely. It's like looking at a tapestry. You can admire it from afar, but to appreciate its intricacies, you need to get up close and examine the individual threads.
That's a great analogy.
And there are so many fascinating examples of this, like Brenda Farnell's work on Plains Indian Sign Language, Adrian Kapler's research on Hawaiian hulapahu, even studying the political significance of dance in Sri Lanka. It all shows how movement can be intertwined with these larger forces, be they cultural, social, or political.
Yeah, and it's cool that they also mention things like, I don't know, the mind-body connection, martial arts, even the role of movement in tourism. It's not just what we typically think of as dance.
Absolutely. Anthropology can be applied to a whole spectrum of human movement.
Yeah.
It helps us understand how culture shapes our experience of our bodies, how values are embodied in different ways of moving, how movement functions in social situations. It's all connected.
So ultimately, it's not just about understanding dance for its own sake, but using dance as a window into understanding the culture itself.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And speaking of understanding, the articles talk about this concept of ethnotheory becoming more important, like understanding meaning from the culture's own perspective. What's that about?
Yeah, ethnotheory, what is that?
It's about recognizing that each culture has its own way of thinking about movement. It's not about imposing Western ideas of dance onto other cultures, but rather exploring the theories and philosophies of movement that exist within a society. It involves asking some really fundamental questions. How did this movement practice begin? What are its origins within this culture? Do they categorize it? Do they have their own genres? How do they create dances? And who are the creators? What are the rules? Is there a vocabulary of movements, a grammar? How do they think about energy and expression? Even more fundamentally, how do they distinguish between dance and other forms of movement, like ritual or just everyday gestures? Do they even have a concept of dance as we understand it?
Wow, so it's about getting inside their heads, understanding their framework for movement.
Precisely.
Okay, now, the outline also talks about what dance ethnology looked like around 1960, like what had been studied up to that point and what were the gaps. What was the state of the field?
Well, it's interesting to see how the field had progressed. While you could find descriptions of dances from different parts of the world in travel books and sociological works, and going way back, the real kind of rigorous, detailed analysis that really took off in the 50 years leading up to 1960.
Okay.
And in Europe, there was a huge push in dance ethnology, particularly thanks to the work of Cecil Sharp in England. This led to government-backed efforts to document folk dances across Europe, particularly in England and the Balkans. It was a big movement.
So there was a real effort to preserve those traditions.
Absolutely. Documenting and preserving European folk dances was a major concern. We also saw the introduction of the Latin system of movement notation, called kinetography, in countries like Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Poland.
Lab notation, that's the one with all those symbols, right?
That's the one. And key figures and institutions played a role in spreading that method, which is still very influential today.
What about dances from other parts of the world? Were they being studied as extensively?
Well, the picture was more fragmented. Like the study of African dances, that was often piecemeal, and a lot of it was linked to research on music.
Okay.
And in the Americas, the dominant mode of documentation was verbal description, though centers for lab notation were starting to emerge in places like Cuba, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and here in the U.S. In the Caribbean, there was a shift happening from sensationalized accounts of dance to more serious folkloric studies. South America, they were actively collecting and interpreting popular, acculturated, and indigenous dances, often with support from government agencies. Though studying the dances of more remote indigenous groups, that was often left to others. And in Mexico, the progress of dance research seemed to ebb and flow, depending on the government's attitude toward it.
So a mixed bag, you could say.
Very much so. Each region had its own story, its own challenges and successes.
What about here in the U.S.? What was the focus back then?
In the U.S., most publications were focused on European folk dances, or popular European theatrical forms. But jazz dance, that was starting to gain traction as a subject for serious scholarly study. American Indian dances, they were sometimes included in broader ethnographic accounts, but there wasn't much involvement from choreographers in those projects. Canada had some discussion of British, French, and indigenous dance traditions, with some anthropological work on native tribes.
So a lot of focus on Europe, with other areas gradually coming into the picture.
It was a time of expansion and exploration, for sure, and amidst all this, the term ethnic dance keeps cropping up. But even back then, there was no clear consensus on what that even meant.
Yeah, that term seems pretty loaded. How did they understand ethnic dance, and how did it relate to folk dance?
It was a real point of contention. Different scholars used the terms in wildly different ways.
Give us some examples.
Okay, Francisca Boas, she used ethnic dance and folk dance pretty much interchangeably. Others defined folk dance more narrowly, like dances that emerged organically within a community as part of everyday life. A scholar named Wolfram, he saw folk dance as part of this traditional knowledge, specifically of historical high cultures to which we belonged. Lemary, she had a more performer-centric view, defining folk dance as dances done for the enjoyment of the performers themselves, within a community. Chujoy saw it as dance created by a people collectively, without a named choreographer expressing their shared feelings. And Thurston, he had multiple categories, from ritual dances to basically any non-professional dance.
So everyone had their own interpretation. Talk about
I think it
confusing.
really highlights the challenges of studying dance across cultures, right?
Sure.
Even the language used to describe it is already so culturally specific. Ted Shawn, he tried to create a hierarchy with ethnic dance as this umbrella term that included folk dance and also what he called ethnologic or art dance. Gertrude Kurath, her understanding evolved over time, but by 1960, she generally defined folk dance as the secular forms and lumped everything under ethnic dance, differentiating both from consciously created art forms like ballet.
So still a lot of debate and no clear-cut definition.
Exactly.
Okay, so putting definitions aside for a moment, why do people dance? What are the reasons, the needs, the motivations that dance seems to fulfill across different societies?
That's a question that has fascinated anthropologists for ages. Scholars like Kurt Sachs, they argued that dance essentially helps a community thrive. You know, it aids their sustenance, their well-being, their connection to the world around them. And you see this reflected in so many examples, like the Cherokee. They have these prophylactic dances meant to ward off illness and maintain social harmony. The Samoans believe that dance aids child development. Mansfield observed that for the Concheros in Mexico, dance was their deepest form of religious expression. Lincoln Kirstein, looking at what he termed primitive dance, he saw themes related to life cycles, vegetation, the history of the group. The Yankovics, they viewed folk dances as a dramatic element of rituals, infused with this ritual magic action significance.
So there's a strong connection to survival, well-being, spirituality.
Absolutely. Dance is often intertwined with those fundamental aspects of human existence.
Now, in Western cultures, it seems like there's been a bit of a shift, right?
Definitely. Religious themes have become more concentrated in art dance, while folk dance has often become more recreational.
Like for fun and exercise.
Exactly. Also, educational, sometimes even with the goal of breaking down prejudices. Ted Shawn suggested that it could even contribute to world unity.
An ambitious goal.
It is. But it speaks to how the function of dance can change in different cultural contexts.
Okay, so another thing I found intriguing was the whole question of who gets to dance. Like, is it individuals or groups? And what about the roles of men and women? How does that play out across cultures?
That's another area where you see such incredible variation. Some societies, like the Pueblo peoples, they have strong tradition of group dances, where collective participation is key.
Okay.
But then you have groups, like those on the North Pacific coast, where individual performance is emphasized. And even within group dances, there can be room for improvisation, for individual expression. And this is often something that's particularly allowed or even encouraged for men, as we see in places like Yugoslavia, Bavaria, Austria, Samoa.
So sometimes it's about blending in, other times it's about standing out.
Exactly. Different cultures value different forms of expression.
And what about men and women? Are there any general patterns in terms of their roles in dance?
There are some tendencies, but there are always exceptions. Men often take dominant roles in ceremonial activities, but you have cases like the Iroquois, where women are very prominent in the dances, or the Brazilian Bumbamu Boy Festival, where women play a key role. And even in Asia, you see different gender dynamics in dance dramas, like in Cambodia versus Japan or China. It's all very context-specific.
So no hard and fast rules.
Not at all. And it's fascinating to look at the customs that govern how men and women participate together. Sometimes they dance separately, sometimes they alternate, sometimes they partner up. And we see these patterns in cultures as diverse as the Iroquois and those in Yugoslavia. Some scholars have even proposed this hypothetical progression, where the way sexes are arranged in dance might reflect a sort of cultural evolution. From dances exclusively for men or women to mixed but non-contact agricultural ceremonies, then to more intimate social dances, with couple dances involving courtship appearing relatively late in this sequence.
It's like dance is a reflection of broader social norms and relationships.
It's a window into how a society views gender, interaction, and expression.
So how about the organization of dance within a community? Does it just happen spontaneously, or are there structures in place?
Well, ritual dances, they tend to be very organized, often structured according to the goals of the group.
Okay.
This could be a ritual society, a clan, or even an occupational group. And ritual societies, they often have these established hierarchies, and the roles of the leaders, those are reflected in the choreography, the organization of the dance.
So the dance mirrors the social structure.
Exactly. It acts it out. Like in Mexico, Groups like the Yaqui and the Concheros, they have these complex hierarchical systems, and that's very evident in how they organize their dances. Clan systems also play a role, particularly among North American Indian groups, influencing patterns of movement and even the spatial arrangements of the dancers. Economic specialization, too, that can lead to the development of distinct dance groups, like guilds of dancers associated with certain profession.
Like a blacksmith's dance, a weaver's dance.
Exactly. We see examples of that in parts of Africa, Guatemala, India,
India.
even in Austria.
So dance is embedded in all these layers of social structure. It's not just about moving your body, it's about expressing your place in the world.
You got it. It's a form of social communication, a way of embodying those relationships and hierarchies.
Now, I'm curious about the environment. Does the physical world where people live affect their dance traditions?
Definitely. There's been a lot of interest in mapping how dance variations correlate with ecological factors. The environment can shape a group's repertoire, their themes, their style of movement. Like communities sharing similar natural resources, like those around the Great Lakes, they often have similar beliefs and dances related to those resources.
That makes sense.
If your way of life revolves around maize or buffalo, those things will likely feature in your dances. And when groups migrate, their traditions can change as they adapt to a new environment. It's all about that relationship with the land.
So nature plays a role in shaping dance.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that dances can sometimes outlive the object they represent. Like a dance about a certain animal might persist even after that animal has disappeared from the region.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It speaks to the enduring power of these traditions.
So apart from the environment, what other explanations have been offered for why dances differ so much?
Well, there's the environment, of course. But then scholars have considered other factors too, things like racial characteristics.
Okay.
Though those ideas are often viewed critically today for obvious reasons.
Right.
And also linguistic affiliations, like whether groups speaking similar languages have similar dances,
Interesting.
and even psychological factors. Some theories explore connections between cultural personality types and characteristic movement styles, or the influence of things like social structures, economics, politics, geography, climate. There's a whole web of influences at play.
So it's not just one thing, it's a whole constellation of factors.
Exactly. And that makes it all the more fascinating to unravel those threads.
Okay, so I'm curious about these recurring forms that keep popping up. Like, are there any universal dance practices? And if so, how do we explain them?
It's intriguing, isn't it? You see certain dance practices appearing in different parts of the world, often related to basic human needs.
Like what?
Obtaining food, resources, influencing weather, protection, those kind of fundamental things. And there are three main theories to explain this. One is parallel invention, where similar practices arise independently because people are facing similar challenges.
Okay.
Another is a common origin, where a form originated in one place and spread as people migrated and adapted it.
Okay.
And then there's diffusion, where ideas spread through direct contact between cultures.
So like cultures borrowing from each other?
Yeah, exactly. And it can be tough to say for sure which explanation is right in a given case. Similarities in form and complexity can offer clues, and archaeological and historical evidence can be very helpful. Like Gertrude Kurath, she suggested that masked dances in Middle America and Central Europe developed independently. But then other researchers, they found similarities suggesting an ancient link between certain dances in the Balkans, southern Russia, and southern France. These energetic dances, they often involve weapons or mock combat. It's a puzzle.
It's like a detective story trying to trace the origins of these dances.
It is, and sometimes the answer might be a mix of these explanations. It's rarely simple.
Okay, so we've got parallel invention, common origin, and diffusion. And then there's also this talk of transculturation and acculturation. How do those fit into the picture?
So diffusion, that's the broad term for the spread of ideas. But then you have transculturation, which is more about a two-way exchange between cultures. Like, think of two neighboring groups. They borrow from each other, they blend elements, and it enriches both their traditions. You see that happening in Pueblo communities.
So it's a more equal exchange, not just one-way borrowing.
Exactly. And then acculturation that often involves more one-sided borrowing, sometimes under pressure, like during colonization where European forms were imposed on indigenous cultures. That happened a lot in the Americas, and it led to these hybrid forms, these blends of European and indigenous styles. And there's this whole debate about whether you can even untangle those influences, separate them back out.
So dance becomes a site of cultural encounter, of exchange, of sometimes conflict.
It's a powerful lens through which to view these historical processes.
Now, the sources also touch on these interdisciplinary connections that dance ethnology has, like with theater science, for example.
Yeah, dance ethnology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It draws on and contributes to other fields. In theater science, there's been this exploration of what they call primitive drama, which often includes dance as a core element.
Okay.
And the idea is that this kind of drama, it reflects the entire worldview of a community. It does this through a combination of actions, words, music, masks, costumes, setting, the whole shebang.
So it's like a total work of art encapsulating their understanding of the world.
Exactly. Though some of those early interpretations, they relied heavily on verbal descriptions without analyzing the movements themselves, which is a limitation.
And what about archaeology and art history? It seems like they could offer clues about dance in the past, right?
Oh, definitely. Archaeological findings like carvings, pottery, and works of art, those can provide valuable insights. Researchers have sometimes found these amazing correspondences between movements depicted in ancient art and those in contemporary traditions, suggesting a long lineage. And for European historic dance, there's a wealth of material for reconstruction.
Yeah.
Written records, artistic depictions,
Mhm.
and there's a growing recognition that choreographers and archaeologists should collaborate, to bring those dances back to life. It's a really exciting area.
It's like time travel through dance. And speaking of connections, the relationship with musicology seems like a no-brainer.
It's such a natural pairing.
Music and dance, they go hand in hand so often.
Absolutely. Studying one can really illuminate the other.
Tell me more.
Well, there's been research exploring the relationship between jazz rhythms and bodily movement, even the idea that musical rhythms themselves originated from dance.
Wow.
Some studies have looked at the connection between emotions, movement range, and musical melodies. There's this famous quote from a musicologist describing dance as the overt physical expression of music, which I think captures it beautifully.
So they're two sides of the same coin.
In many ways, yes. And there's so much more to explore in this connection, so much potential for future research.
Okay, moving on to how dance is actually recorded and analyzed. It seems like there's been a lot of effort to develop methods for capturing this ephemeral art form.
Yeah, because dance is fleeting. It's in the moment. You need ways to preserve it, to analyze it.
Right.
And over time, different methods have emerged. One of the earliest involved making ground plans, like diagrams showing the paths dancers take on the floor.
Okay.
They use symbols to indicate direction, dancers, all that. Verbal descriptions, those have always been used. They're not great for capturing the specifics of movement, but they can convey the overall atmosphere, the drama. Then you have pictorial aids, like stick figures, drawings, photographs. Those provide a visual record. And then there's the big one, lab annotation.
Ah, lab annotation, the famous one.
The one with all the squiggles and symbols.
Mhm.
It's a super comprehensive, precise way of recording movement. It breaks it down into space and time. It's got this vertical staff. You read it bottom to top. And different symbols indicate direction, level, duration, which body part is moving. It's incredibly detailed.
So you can write down a dance, basically.
Exactly. And the Dance Notation Bureau, they've been instrumental in standardizing and promoting it. There are introductions for non-dancers so you can actually learn to read it. It's been used to study acculturation problems in choreology, like identifying native versus Spanish elements in Mexican Indian dances. It's a powerful tool.
Wow, I'm impressed. And are there other systems out there besides lab annotation?
Yeah, there are quite a few. Some notable ones were created by Toth, Zanif, Katsarova-Kukudova, Benesh, Loring. Some have been adapted to be used alongside musical notation, so you can see how the dance and music line up in time.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it reveals a lot about phrasing, whether the movements coincide with the music or overlap. That can tell you about local style, about how dances have spread. It's a whole other level of analysis.
So having these detailed records, that's crucial for developing theories about dance, right?
Absolutely. It's like having data for your research. You can test your ideas, refine your hypotheses. And in dance ethnology, reliable hypotheses, they're usually connected to specific problems, and they're often tested through analysis of these records, especially notation.
Okay.
Like Cecil Sharp. He developed theories about Morris dance based on his observations and transcriptions. The Gankovics, they proposed these potentially universal patterns of change in ritual dances. Sachs, he had these grand ideas about symbolism and diffusion. But the point is, you need solid evidence, right?
Yeah, you can't just make stuff up.
Exactly. And for those bigger questions, you need a lot of systematic data. That's the foundation of good research.
So now I want to know about the nitty-gritty. What about the practical side of doing research in dance ethnology?
The field work, the challenges, the realities on the ground, it's an adventure.
I bet.
And the progress of the field, it really depends on things like technology, the training of researchers, the relationships they build. So you have technology, which is a huge help. Films, photography, sound recordings, they're invaluable tools. Though they can't replace notation entirely.
Sure.
Films give you movement and time, but even ethnographic films can have limitations in terms of what they capture. Still, photography is great for postures, costumes, all that. Sound recordings, essential for documenting the music.
Mm.
But coordinating film and sound, well, that can be tricky.
Sounds like a lot of logistics involved.
It can be a juggling act, for sure. And then you have the training aspect.
Right.
Like, what does it even take to become a dance ethnologist? It's such an interdisciplinary field. You need a bit of everything. Anthropology, kinesiology, knowledge of dance forms, notation, music, you name it. And historically, there haven't been many programs that combine all that.
So it's kind of a self-made path.
To some extent, yes. Though there are more opportunities now for specialized study. And of course, collaboration is essential, right?
Sure.
Because you need so many different skills. You need people to work together, to share ideas.
Makes sense.
Conferences and societies, those are crucial for that exchange. Though historically, there haven't been that many specifically for dance scholarship, particularly outside Europe. The Dance Research Center in the U.S., that was a big step forward.
So building a community of scholars.
Exactly. And the relationship between scholars and the communities they study, that's also paramount. Scholars play a role in making this knowledge accessible.
Yeah.
Sometimes they even perform themselves or advise.